What's up, design family, and welcome back to another episode of Fittdesign TV. So glad to have you back on the channel. On today's episode, we'll be looking at fashion retail distribution and whether you as a young fashion brand should consider going big or small when it comes to this distribution. Yes, it's true. We live in a digital world where most young fashion brands are choosing to go direct to consumer, usually through their website. This doesn't mean that you should completely neglect physical distribution. Each of these two options is going to have its own allure and its own pros and cons. But definitely physical distribution can bring an awareness to your brand that a direct to customer solution potentially cannot. So on today's episode, we'll look at whether you should consider going through larger retailers or smaller retailers and how each can have a specific impact on your specific fashion brand and ultimately give you the tools you need to choose which is going to be right for you. Hey guys, and welcome to Fittdesign TV. So glad to have you here. On this channel, we discuss all things sports fashion, graphic design, manufacturing, and technology. We'll discuss key topics, answer pressing questions, and provide actionable steps on starting your own product line. If you're interested in any of the above topics, stick around. You're in for a good one. When it comes to physical distribution, it's usually better to have multiple retailers selling your products, regardless of how small each of these retailers' orders might be. At the end of the day, if a retailer fits your brand profile, your brand aesthetic, having an outlet through them is going to help expose your brand to newer customers faster and at a larger scale. So this is something that is a major plus of physical distribution. However, definitely be warned, when you're relying on others to sell your products, you definitely don't want to over leverage yourself. These retailers are likely to be able to control your cash flow and are known to be able to drop a collection or a retailer at an instant. So depending solely on this channel can also be quite damaging and can leave you in a precarious situation. So there definitely are pros and cons to each. Here, we're more discussing the pros and cons of going towards large distribution, aka through companies or retail outlets like Harrods, Neiman Marcus, or smaller and more specialized boutique stores. As I mentioned, there are two key scales of distribution when it comes to physical fashion distribution. We have the larger distribution and the smaller and more specialty boutique stores. We're going to start discussing the smaller option first and looking at the pros. Number one is definitely going to be that these types of stores are going to be better at targeting the specific consumer set that you're looking for. This is definitely going to make it easier to target these people and at the same time provide a more direct and specific buying experience. The types of customers that are likely to visit these stores are going to be looking for what you're selling. So that synergy is definitely going to be there. That's going to help create a better harmony between retailer, customer, and the actual brand that's being sold. Because of their smaller size, these stores are much more likely to be able to offer your customers a more specialized and personalized buying experience, which is undoubtedly going to help lead to better customer loyalty and chances are better customer spending. Number three, these types of stores are definitely going to be much more willing and flexible to negotiate with you. Chances are you're going to have more leverage with these types of stores than some of the larger stores, which is going to lead to more flexibility on shipping terms, payment terms, packaging, so on and so forth. Some of the cons of this type of distribution are that a store like this is much more likely or much less likely to place large orders that you feel are quite worth it when compared to some of the larger chain stores that you may actually be approached by. Two, the actual reach per individual store is likely to be less. So in order to distribute the same amount, you're going to have to target many stores, and that's going to bring a logistics overhead with it. You may have to employ more people to be able to do that distribution. So the actual benefit that you gain per individual store may be much, much less than a larger retailer like a Neiman Marcus. And then lastly, these stores obviously are going to be less financially stable than their larger counterparts. So it's very likely that by the time this store is ready to finish an order with you, that they could face cash flow issues or they could even be bankrupt, which would leave you in a very tough position. On the other hand, you could definitely consider going big. This could involve distributing through much larger department stores or even chain stores. Think of brands like Harrods, Neiman Marcus, so on and so forth. The obvious pros of this approach are going to be that number one, you're going to have much more brand visibility than choosing to go through some of the smaller stores. These retailers are much likely to have a higher foot traffic and to be positioned in prime locations, which is going to get your brand noticed much faster and at a much larger scale. Number two, you're going to have the chance to be alongside some of the industry greats. This is definitely going to help strengthen your brand positioning simply by being stocked alongside extremely well-known brands. This is going to give your own brand a much more established and refined and polished look. Number three, these types of stores are likely to have a more established customer base and higher traffic in each individual store, which makes sense that it could potentially lead to a higher volume of sales. And now the cons of this type of distribution. Just as there's a benefit in being stocked next to these established brands, you're also going to face an increased pressure of competition. By being placed next to these brands and being less well known, you're going to find it tougher to stand out from the crowd as people will tend to gravitate towards the brands that they know better. Number two, these types of retailers are, yes, more likely to place larger orders than these smaller boutiques. However, this also does increase the potential for chargebacks and actual order cancellations, which, as we all know, is going to leave your brand in a precarious position if that does end up happening. Number three, when it comes to cons, is that these types of retailers are going to offer you lower margins on your sales. Because they're larger, they have more purchasing power and will do a better job at actually squeezing your bottom line. And last but definitely not least is that these types of stores are much more likely to impose stricter requirements on everything from the packaging to the shipping to the labeling. And this could lead to potentially profit-harming issues if you're unable to follow these strict requirements properly. Well, that is pretty much it on this episode, guys. By now, you should have a much clearer understanding of the two options available to you when it comes to physical retail distribution. If you're going large or if you're going small, each is going to have a pros or a set of pros and cons that you may find useful depending on which type of brand you are or where you are in the life cycle of your brand. If you guys enjoyed this episode and want to see other fashion business pieces like this, consider checking out our channel and subscribing if you haven't done so already. We put out great content every Wednesday and every Sunday and haven't missed a beat for the last 2 years. So I highly recommend you check us out. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Fittdesign TV. Until the next week's episode, stay awesome.